I'll give you an example. We know that from the 2.3 in the workforce, there is probably a significant percentage of those people who are actually just on the cusp of reaching the level that is considered appropriate. The problem is that we don't have very good market segmentation of that population, and as a result, we don't have very customized strategies to respond to that without thinking, oh my God, now we have to tackle 3.4 million people whose literacy levels are below what is required. So I think that from a government perspective, we need to be realistic, right? It's like if you're going to have funding, it's like where do you invest in order to get the highest yield for your investment? So, and it's a practical question, but it's also one that allows the discourse to be a lot more manageable than what we have right now, which is, oh my God, this is a huge issue and we don't know how to tackle it, whether it's from employers, government, or even community organizations' perspective who are doing, like the people in this room, an incredible amount of work.
There was a lot in that.
No. I'm gonna take one segment of it.
Good. Help me out here.
I'll come with the end and then kind of go back to the beginning. What we need is a hell of a lot better data transparency, right? Because what happens is we end up collecting all this information. Pick literacy if you want, or pick whatever. We're literacy, so we pick literacy. So the people who are advocating for literacy, if, for example, 6 of the 7, if we use the essential skills, let's say 8 of the 9 essential skills are met and 1 isn't, then it's categorized as a literacy problem, right? Well, maybe not, depending on which skill and how far below the hurdle it is and where is the person going. So I think, there's arguments why people want to classify that as being a failure, when in fact what we probably ought to look at is how can we make it a success rather than a failure, and whether that success is achieved by increasing that area or whether the success is achieved by better counseling in terms of career focus so you give more time to deal with that area over time. I don't know, there could be a variety of things, but too often we take kind of the simplistic point of view, and I did in my presentation. 60% of Canadian immigrants are not literate, right? I don't think that's true, actually, but that's the figure. If I was able to go into every one of them and look at all the data, I probably would be able to draw a better understanding of where the deficiencies are and what we ought to be able to do.
So, because one of the questions asked too is where do you focus your funding? And I think that you've just answered that there as well, is taking more time to segment and understand.
I think you've got to understand the relationship between literacy and employment better than we do, and recognize that literacy can occur over time, and it doesn't have to only occur at one point in time. In fact, it's got to occur over time. One of the things we're starting to discover is people who we thought were literate aren't. Right? And this is starting to show up as people shift jobs. And we certainly saw it in second career. When people left jobs and then had to come back to institutions to look for an educational experience beyond second career, or beyond their previous career, one of the biggest problems was literacy. They've been in the workforce 20 years and had major holes in their ability to deal with new training.
So is this a reasonable question to then, or literacy is a progressive?
Yes. And it's not only progressive, but evolving.
In terms of the definition itself?
Yeah.
Okay. We've got a question. Yes. Oh, good. I was going to ask for something
right
on
side
this
of the
side.
room.
I was feeling unbalanced, so thank you.
My name is Linda Wenzel. I'm the Literacy Project Coordinator for the Nova Scotia Federation of Labour. And I'd like to ask you a question about something you didn't address in your presentation. I live in Lunenburg, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And a lot of our retirees, in fact, 50% of our population of about 2,300 are families with no children attached to them. We have a large proportion of people who retire in Lunenburg. And a lot of them are community volunteers.
Right.
They add value to our
Yes.
economy through
Yeah.
their volunteerism.
Yeah.
They take workshops and courses to
Yeah.
address tourism issues. You didn't address that in your presentation, but could you speak for a moment in your presentation about the value of volunteerism in especially the tourism society?
Yeah, let me slightly broaden it, but I think address your area. It's absolutely going to be, I don't know what's going to happen, but it's going to be absolutely fascinating over the next 30 years what does happen. When you look at the demographics of an aging population, what occurs is the change in average death rate goes from the high 70s to the mid 80s somewhere over the next 20 years. What that means is if we keep the same nominal retirement rate at 65, the amount of time people have left in their lives is going to grow and grow and grow. And one of the issues and potential new services / careers is how do retirees use their time? Some of the data shows that, and we talked a little bit about it, but what I didn't talk about was volunteerism, and particularly among the female retirees. Very avid interest in retirement and volunteering. Education, both formal education and kind of self-education is high on that list. Mentorship is high on that list. So aside from the employment type things, so I think I think two things are going to happen, and this is what I'm trying to think through on this next project. One is you're going to have more active people longer doing things like the lady suggested. I think you're going to have very new careers emerge for other people to facilitate the longer term interests of the retirees. As a brief illustration, if we go back to that cyclical work, I suspect 10 years down the road you're going to have dedicated temp agencies that only work with retirees to provide cyclical work opportunities for retirees. And they specialize in that market. They understand their audience, they understand their clientele, and that kind of thing will evolve. And there's other things that if this other paper ever gets out, I'll be dealing with too.
It's interesting you make a reference that a lot of the ladies want to get into volunteers. I guess the market for the men is fishing, hunting, and golf.
Well, also the men die off 5 years earlier, so
okay,
they got a little
fine.
less
They
time.
need something to do. Fine. So, we've got one more. Is it one more question? Then we're going to. I think we're going to wrap.
And I'll happy to stay around for others who had questions, if you want to.
Hi. I'm Diane. My background's as an employment counselor. And I'm just very curious to know if have we studied or are we aware of any models in the rest of the world that possibly have worked and created a good balance between available work and available skills? And is there any time in our history in terms of Ontario or Canada where it worked well? And if so, wouldn't it be interesting to study that and figure out how it came to be and if there's controllable aspects to that?
Yeah. I think it's kind of a yes-no answer. Yes, there were times, and there were particular times in the 50s, late 40s, 50s, where you had basically a labor market. And that was the time of high immigration, relatively low unemployment, reasonable good match, because a willing mind and a strong back kind of association gave people more flexibility to move into a variety of jobs. If you look, are other people doing it better? I haven't seen any. And almost, you can pick the country. Some people may say, oh, well, China must be doing it better. They're not. They've got huge unemployment, particularly among their university graduates. The States certainly isn't doing it any better. Europe is actually starting to try to, and the quick anecdote I said before, and I'm not sure I understand it yet, but their EU labor mobility creates some interesting opportunities because they can shift people back and forth among a number of countries much easier, which allows them to be more responsive to shifts in the economy. But I'm sorry, there may be people that do it. I haven't run across them.
And I think just before, so Tony is going to wrap up, but I think there is actually, part of how we answer our questions is ask the questions the right way too. And I'm not talking about that specific questions asked tonight, but it's not just looking at countries and nations. It's looking at different business models. There are businesses today that I've just been exposed to one recently that I think is stunning, that actually answers exactly as a brilliant solution on a global and a local scale for the cyclical labor. And so as each one of our pillars that we represent, I think it's important, and I challenge everybody to make sure that your research and your questions goes beyond your traditional pillars in terms of the kind of questions you ask and the places you look for in terms of getting the information. Because I've not yet failed to find an answer, but what I have often failed to do is ask the right question. And anybody heard? I only got one right. Thank you. Yeah, just one clap. But anyway, so Rick, thank you very much. Thank you all very much for this evening and making the time. And I suppose this is a topic that's a progressive topic, and there's a lot of debate and a lot of learning before this one's landed. And I think you're probably right. I think there's a lot more pain to be experienced before we all properly come together and solve the problems. Tony, thank you.
Mark, thank you. Well, it falls to me to just close with a few words of thanks. First of all, thank you to the Ontario Literacy Coalition for hosting this evening. I think it's been stimulating and has brought together many different people. Leslie, thank you. Thank you to my colleagues, Colleges Ontario, who've been here and working behind the scenes on so many of these issues as we have developed our work through Rick and through other avenues. And thank you for sponsoring this evening. I'd like to thank our colleagues in ministry staff and in political offices. Marie Lison, you and many of your colleagues have been here this evening and have been working extraordinarily hard on policy matters, as you referenced in your question as well. Thank you so much for your participation. To Mark and Rick, we'll close by saying thank you to both of you. In lieu of a gift, we are doing small donations on your behalf to charities of your choices. And I think that's a very appropriate thing to do. Let's thank together Mark Rivers for hosting this evening's conversation at the end of the evening. And Rick for demonstrating what you're talking about. Work after retirement. In a good cause and with good effect. Congratulations, Rick. Thanks very much, everyone. That's the end of the evening. Good night.